This is Femi Kuti, and you are listening to NYC Radio Live.
Hey folks, how you doing? Thanks for listening to NYC Radio Live. David Ellenbogen here. I just did a show with Arun Luthra. You're going to really enjoy this conversation. Let's check out a little bit of his music, and we're hyping up a show he's doing this Friday, if you get the podcast in a timely manner, at Flushing Town Hall. And yeah, check it out, and we'll be back with Arun Luthra. Enjoy.
I was born in Worcester, Massachusetts, but I grew up in Brussels, Belgium for the formative part of my childhood. Like the main part of my childhood was in Brussels, Belgium.
Like so many jazz greats.
That's right. Yeah, me and Toots, baby. You know. But I come from a multicultural international family. You know, my on my father's side, my family's from Punjab, and my grandfather got married in Punjab and then emigrated to Kenya. This is during the British Empire days. Mm-hmm. And he made his life in Kenya. So my father was born in Kenya as part of the South Asian community in East Africa. And then at the age of, I think it was 19, my father said, you know what, I'm going to go to the UK and go to university. So he moved to the UK. And by that point, my parents had actually already met because my mother is also a child of empire. Being British, her mother lived in Central and Eastern Africa. She had an aunt in Kenya. She had relatives in South Africa and what was at the time called Rhodesia, which is now Zimbabwe. So my parents actually met in East Africa, but then reunited in the UK a short while later, and that's where they got married and started their family.
And back then, I guess you did it with letters. You wrote letters like, "My dearest, I will be arriving by boat."
Well, in British English, the term Asian refers to South Asians. And my mother was searching for my dad, from what I understand, when she got to London. And she inquired at the Asian Students' Union and found him, you know. So
wow.
Yeah.
Everybody's got a story.
It's amazing, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very interesting how these, the big history turns into the little histories of individual families, right? I mean,
absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I joke that, kind of my family background is like a story of empire, you know what I mean? Like, I wouldn't exist if it weren't for the British Empire,
Sure.
My parents never would have met. But yeah, just what you're saying, the macrocosmic idea, the macro history of the world and this huge event of the British Empire and all this conquering and domination and exploitation, and then from that springs this love story of two people who otherwise never would have met.
And your grandfather was working for the government, or he just
yes, so originally this is my father. I did an oral history with my father about our family's history, and he said at that time when he was a young man and just got married, the government jobs were the best jobs, so that the British or the Indian civil service, the British-run Indian civil service were where the best jobs were. But it was very hard to get work in India because those were the most highly prized jobs, a lot of competition. But you could also get civil service jobs in other parts of the empire, like, for example, in East Africa. So my grandfather emigrated to Kenya, where his my grandfather's brother was actually already there when he moved, and my grandfather worked for the British Railway.
Oh.
So that was the first, when he first started his family, he was working for the railway, and eventually he started his own business. It was a construction company, like he was a contractor, yeah.
Wow. Interesting. Yeah, and I guess, so it was the railway in Africa.
That's right, yes.
So they were moving mining materials and
all the exploitation of
stuff.
natural resources and all that kind of thing. I don't know if there's a famous book called The Man-Eaters of Tsavo, which is about this, it was either 2 or 3 man-eating lions that terrorized the railway workers during this period of railway construction in East Africa. And actually my grandfather lived through that. And when my father took me to Kenya, I had that book in my hand, and that's an amazing book to read if you want to get a flavor for what it was like in British East Africa at the time, yeah.
Yeah, I read a book about a guy who just followed one of the, I don't know if it's still a current train path or an old train path that's in disuse, but he followed it through like that southern Africa, where, what was Rhodesia, I think, and all that, and it's still crazy, like going through the Congo and all that stuff.
Yes.
It's still kind of the same story in a lot of ways. Of crazy exploitation and unstable governments and stuff like that.
Well, the legacy of empire is not a proud one, that's for sure, in many, many ways.
Right. Okay, so you got this international thing, and then your grandparents, your parents were in London, met in London, and then they came to the United States.
Right. Well, they met in Kenya, but then married and started their family in the UK in London, and then my brother and sister were born in the UK, and then eventually my father was accepted to do his doctorate at Clark University in Worcester, Massachusetts, which is why they left Europe and moved to Massachusetts, and then I came along.
Yeah, and what was he studying?
So he was a toxicologist. He'd studied pre-med, and he was into chemistry, biology, and that general field of study. And eventually he settled on toxicology, which is a fairly new field at the time. And he eventually, the majority of his career was spent as an administrator for the California EPA, actually. So, enforcing environmental regulations and, analyzing environmental impact studies for new construction projects and all that kind of thing, So that was his specialty, yeah.
And your mom,
Well, my mom, also has an incredible life path. She did so much, throughout. She's done so much throughout her life. She studied sculpture and painting at the Sorbonne. She hitchhiked through Europe with a friend in the 50s, went, all over the place, and then, became a parent. She started her family, and then she worked as a translator at the nascent European Union. So she was a translator, and eventually she became a teacher of English as a second language when I was with her in Belgium, and eventually she became an early childhood educator in the United States when we moved back to the States. And she finished her career at Head Start, which is this wonderful federal government program that helps families with young children to maximize their children's chance of success with good nutrition, good education, all that kind of thing. And then she retired a few years ago, and now she's just enjoying her family, traveling the world, and and she'll actually be at the concert on Saturday. She lives in California, but she's coming out to New York City to hear the music. Yeah.
Cool. And so when did the music bug hit you?
Well, I would say I was just born to it. As long as I can remember, music always held this fascination for me. My brother and sister were teenagers when I was born, so I always looked up to them, and I wanted to be like them. And I have very distinct childhood memories of my brother playing guitar when I was a kid. My sister studied flute, classical flute, and she was also into Jethro Tull and that kind of stuff. So music was in the house. I'm very lucky to come from a family that loves the art, so I was surrounded by books and records and paintings and going to museums and the opera and concerts. So I was surrounded by it and just really fascinated from the earliest age. And at first it was just, I think a lot of it was just like I wanted to join in with my brother and sister and play music with them. That was a big motivation, I'm sure.
Nice. So right now your project is centering around Konokol, like the South Indian kind of rhythmic concept. Maybe just how'd you get into that first? Like, how'd that come to you?
Well, as I said, I come from a family that loves the arts,
Yeah.
great record collection. So music was in the house all the time, and we had a very extensive collection of Indian classical music recordings that my father and mother would listen to, and for me, I was always really drawn to the rhythmic aspect of the music. That's, I think, the part of it that excites me, instinctively at first. And whenever I would hear musicians vocalize rhythms, so in the northern tradition with bowls, with the tabla bowls, da din din da da, all that kind of thing, and then hearing Carnatic musicians from the south of India doing Konokol, which is the vocalizing the rhythms with the South Indian syllables, I just, as soon as I heard that, I was like, oh my God, that is so cool. I want to learn how to do that, But it took me a long time to finally get there because, I studied classical guitar as a kid. And then when I was back in the States, I was playing in the school concert band, playing saxophone and clarinet and all that kind of, just playing music. I had a rock band with my buddies that I played electric bass in, all the normal stuff that kids do when they want to play music. But finally, when I settled on the saxophone, was really serious about my jazz studies, so I studied all the masters, and really, worked to develop as a jazz player. But always in the back of my mind is like, I got to get to these vocalized rhythms because I love that stuff so much. And finally, I started, looking for a teacher, and I found a couple of folks in New York at first who were more from the Hindustani tradition. And then I was fortunate to spend a month in Chennai during a Carnatic festival season in December. And I spent a month at this place called the Bharadwani Institute, which is led by a Veena player called Karaikudi Subramaniam. And that's where I really first seriously got into Konokol. And then it was just like, I just got deeper and deeper into it. I just fell in love with it and found lots of different teachers. And you and I have a couple of friends in common, that I've studied with. So I've studied with Ganesh Kumar and Selva Ganesh and a buddy of mine called B.C. Manjunath, who's a wonderful mridangist and Konokol exponent. Yeah, so I just fell in love with it and just tried to gather all the knowledge I possibly could, from everybody.
Nice. Maybe can you summarize the approach of Konokol? What makes it unique amongst rhythmic concepts?
Wow. Well, I'm a little embarrassed to be a spokesperson for Konokol. I mean, there are a lot of other folks that could do it much better than me, but I would say what makes it so remarkable is that it's a way to codify in your mind any rhythm, and it allows you to analyze phrase lengths or polyrhythms or cross rhythms. And because you can vocalize them using the system of Konokol, that means not only can you understand them intellectually, but you can also perform them almost instantaneously. So maybe just as a kind of a little example, imagine you're thinking, oh, what would 4 in the time of 3 sound like, right? So I've got 3, 1, 2, 3. So then in Konokol that will be da, ki, da, da, ki, da. Now I want to do 4 against that. So the first thing I do is I divide each beat by 4, which becomes taka dimmi, taka dimmi, taka dimmi, taka dimmi, taka dimmi, taka dimmi. And then I know that I have to group those into 3s to make 4 against 3. So instead of 1, 2, 3, taka dimmi, taka dimmi, taka dimmi, I go 1, 2, 3. Takita, 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 ta, 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 ta. And then there we go. Instantaneously, I've created 4 against 3.
Right.
And Konokol allows you to do that, both orally, you can hear it, and you can intellectually figure out the math and get to where you need to go.
Right.
It's an amazing rhythmic system, yeah.
And what's the history of Konokol?
Well, I'm not an expert on the history. I know that in both the northern and southern traditions, Hindustani and Carnatic, vocalizing music is a part of the learning process. So if you are a disciple of a tabla guru or a mridangam guru in the south, whatever instrument you play, your guru is going to expect you to sing what you play as well as play it on your instrument. So my understanding is that the Konokol syllables originally corresponded to specific drum strokes on the mridangam, which is the main drum in Carnatic, South Indian classical music. And so they're very specific syllables, and you get these phonemes that are difficult for non-native speakers to hear the difference, like, ta, ta, things like that, right? So, And so, ta means you hit the drum this way, and ta means that way, and
Right.
these, right? And the same with the bowls of tabla, right? Da din din da da, da te te kata ga di gene da, right? Te te,
Right.
two different things.
Right.
So originally, I think they were developed as teaching tools. So you would sing the rhythm, and then you would know from what syllables you're saying how to strike the drum in order to make that rhythm happen on your instrument. But eventually, it became its own practice and divorced from the actual instrument. So then, instead of playing the rhythm on a drum, you vocalize it, which is so much fun. It's
Nice.
And as a saxophone player, that means I don't have to now spend a lifetime learning the technique of a new instrument, right? I don't have to learn kanjira or mridangam or gatam. I can do these rhythms vocally and not have to learn a whole new instrument,
Right.
which gives me access to
Yeah.
those rhythms in a
It's
way that's
transferable to anything.
really wonderful. Exactly, yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Well, let's hear something of yours. What do you want to? What should we listen to?
Well, let's see. The music that I'll be playing at my performance on Saturday, April 28th, will be brand new, so I don't have any recordings of that. But my band is called the Konokol Jazz Project, and it's a quartet, foundationally, with myself on saxophone and Konokol, piano, bass, and drums. And I have a recording of a concert I did at the New School a little while ago that features a guest mridangam player called Akshay Anantapadmanabhan.
Oh, sure.
And I'd love to play a track from that concert recording. There's a track called Collective, which was originally actually written for this crazy ensemble that had 3 keyboard players, saxophone, trumpet, a vocalist, and 2 bass players. It's this really weird, randomly assembled collective, which is why I called the tune Collective. And then eventually I reorchestrated it, rearranged it for my quartet. So Collective would be a good place to start, yeah.
Cool. All right. Let's check it out.
Ta kita tam ta kita tam ta dim ta ka din ta ka ta kita tam ta kita tam ta dim kirta ka ta ka din ta kita tam ta kita tam ta dim ta ka din ta ka ta ka jun ta ka jun ta ka jun ta ka din ta kita tam ta kita tam ta dim ta ka din ta ka ta kita tam ta kita tam ta dim ta ka din ta ka ta ta dim ta ka dim ta ka jun ta ka din ta ta kita tam ta dim ta ka din ta ka ta ki ra ta ka tam ta ki ra ta ka tam ta ki ra ta ka dim ta ka jun ta kita tam ta dim ta ka din ta tam ta kita tam ta dim ta ka din ta ka ta tam ta ka jun ta dim ta ka ta kita tam ta kita tam ta dim ta kita tam ta kita tam ta ka dim ta ka jun ta ka din ta ka ta tam ta kita tam ta dikina don get ra kita tam ta kita tam ta kita tam ta dim ta dim kira ka ta ka din ta ka din ta ta kita tam ta dim kira ka ta ka din ta ka jun ta ka jun ta ka jun ta ka din ta kita tam ta dim ta ka din ta ka ta tam ta kita tam ta dim ta ka din ta ka ta kita tam ta kita tam ta dim ta ka din ta dim ta ka din ta ka ta di mi ta ki ta ta ka di mi ta ki ta ka ta ka di mi ta ki ta ka din ta ta de mi ta ki ta tam ta ki ta de mi ta ki ta tam dim ta dim ta ki ta de mi ta ki ta tam dim ta tam ta ki ta de mi ta ki ta tam ta dim ta ki ta de mi ta ki ta tam ta dim ta ki ta dim ta ki ta dim ta ki ta tam.
So you're doing this concert, and you also live in Queens, right? That's part of the whole kind of concept of this event?
That's right. So there is a wonderful foundation called Exploring the Metropolis, which aims to provide workspace for artists. So they have a lot of fantastic programs for, for example, composers and choreographers to collaborate and have a space to rehearse, and other programs like that. And one of their grant programs is their Exploring the Metropolis Composers Residencies. And the concept behind it is to provide composers residencies in all 5 boroughs of New York City. And you apply in the borough in which you live. So I live in Queens, so I applied for the Queens composers residencies, and as far as I remember, there are 2 Queens residencies, one at the Queens Museum and one at Flushing Town Hall. And I was really delighted to be awarded the composer's residency at Flushing Town Hall for 2017, 2018. And then subsequent to that, I was thinking about, okay, what do I want to do at the end of my residency, to show what work I've done, and what better way to present music than in a concert, obviously. And so I applied to the Queens Council on the Arts, which is another amazing organization which funds the arts in the borough of Queens, and I applied for a New Works grant to present the new music I've written during my composer residency. And again, I was very fortunate and very grateful to receive this grant to present this concert. So this concert will be on April 28th, which is this coming Saturday at 6 p.m. at Flushing Town Hall, where my residency was. And it's made possible by Exploring the Metropolis and Queens Council on the Arts.
Yeah, and you were saying that Queens is not as much on the map in people's minds as kind of it should be, in terms of all the great musicians, jazz musicians who have lived there, and it's kind of a less told story, right?
Absolutely. I mean, it's an incredible story. There's a wonderful document called the Queens Jazz Trail Map, which sadly is out of print, but it's a hand-drawn map which shows dozens of these great musicians, jazz musicians, who lived in Queens over these past, many decades. So, maybe the most famous example would be Louis Armstrong, who settled in Queens in 1943. He bought a house in Corona and lived there till the end of his life. But in addition to that, you have, greats like Dizzy Gillespie, John Coltrane. There's a housing complex called the Dory Miller Houses, which is named after a World War II veteran who's he was a hero at Pearl Harbor. At the time the United States military was segregated, so African Americans were not able to perform combat duty. But he acted heroically during the Pearl Harbor attack, saved many of his comrades, and was awarded a medal for bravery. And this housing complex is named after him in Queens here, called the Dory Miller Houses. And there, Jimmy Heath, Cannonball Adderley, and Clark Terry lived.
Wow.
And then, Billie Holiday lived in Queens. Mal Waldron was raised in Queens. He was born in Manhattan, but raised in Queens. His father worked on the Long Island Railroad. Lena Horne lived here. Tony Bennett was born in Astoria. Junior Mance lived in Queens. I mean, the list is amazing.
Count Basie, right?
Yes, Count Basie. Just one iconic figure after another made their home in Queens. And as you were saying, it's just a side of jazz history that's not often told, and I think has been largely neglected and forgotten. Queens wasn't known as a place where a lot of performances were happening, but in terms of a community of artists, it's unsurpassed as far as I can tell.
Yeah.
It's really amazing. And a lot of that comes down to the fact that, the history of housing discrimination and, racial politics and all of these things affected, where African Americans could find a place to live. And eventually Queens became a place where it was possible to have a middle-class life as a non-white person. You had access to housing, you had good schools, and green space. I had a wonderful conversation with the great Jimmy Heath and asked him about some of this, because he still has a home in Queens at the Dory Miller Houses. And he said, Harlem was great, but I moved to Queens because I'd have better schools for my children. I had green space. I had a park where I could go to. I had more living space, a larger home, And so finally, African Americans had access to that kind of housing, and so you had this incredible influx. And from the heavyweight boxing champion Joe Louis to all these amazing figures, Jackie Robinson moved to Queens because that's where they could have
right. And other places were not, like Long Island, for example, were not distributing loans.
That's right. There were so many ways in which housing segregation was enforced, through redlining, through denying African Americans access to loans, through just simply refusing to rent or sell to African Americans or people of color in in certain neighborhoods, all of that kind of thing. And then there was a crucial Supreme Court decision, which called the Shelley versus Kramer, which in 1948 actually opened up a lot of housing developments to African Americans. So that was a key factor in why, around that time, Louis Armstrong moved there before then, but why more and more African Americans were able to have access to certain kinds of housing in Queens, among other places.
Right. Wow. So you, how'd you end up in New York City?
Well, once I was really determined to be a musician and be a jazz musician, it just seemed logical to me that New York was the place to go, and I've been in New York a long time now, since the 90s. So, I kind of bounced around a little bit first. I had to find my feet. I thought I was going to be a theoretical physicist, actually, because I really was into, Heisenberg and Schrodinger and Albert Einstein and Stephen Hawking and all these guys, and I was really into what they were doing, and I was reading all these books like The Tao of Physics and In Search of Schrodinger's Cat, and, doing well in science classes in high school and all that. And I ended up going to the University of California, Berkeley, to be a physicist. But after a year, I just realized I have no choice. I have to be a musician. It's like, music chose me, and I have to do this.
But you were able to hang with you were making progress with the physics. Like
I was really into it, but it didn't take long once I got to UC Berkeley to realize, this isn't for me. And then I ended up spending all my time playing music. There's a student club called the UC Jazz Ensembles, and I just spent all my time there rehearsing and practicing, and I kind of abandoned my studies. Yeah. And then, after, I realized, okay, this is what I'm going to do. Then I had to kind of figure out, okay, what's the next step? And I spent 2.5, 3 years just practicing like a maniac, 8, 10, 12 hours a day. I was just practicing all the time, found a great private teacher, studied. And then I applied to the New School in New York for my undergrad degree to come to New York and study. So that's how I ended up here. And then after I graduated, I stayed,
Nice.
I love it here. I love it.
Yes. And how have you seen the city kind of change since the 90s when you were...
Wow. In so many ways. I mean, that's a whole other discussion, right? I mean, the 90s would be the Giuliani period, right?
Right.
And, it's the whole notion of, what they call it, broken windows, policing, and really trying to, make New York City friendly to corporations and kind of, sanitizing the city in a lot of different ways. And, I think we're really seeing the culmination of that in a lot of ways, where income inequality is at an all-time high. It's harder and harder for artists and people without huge incomes to find decent housing and find good neighborhoods to live in. There's more and more gentrification. It's changed a lot, and in a lot of ways not for the better. I feel it makes me sad, and people like you who are just who are cultural warriors and really doing fighting the good fight to keep this diversity and this culture going in New York City, because that's what New York City's known for. We need that so desperately, and I think the fight is getting harder and harder in a lot of ways.
The rent is too damn high.
There we go. That sums it up.
Anyway, yeah. Well, let's take it out on some more music. What should we be listening to?
Well, let's see. How about we listen to let's listen to KJP, which is one of the tracks from this concert recording, which features a wonderful mridangam player addition to my quartet, Akshay Nantapadmanabhan. I mentioned him a second ago. And that's a piece that's full on Konokol meets jazz. Yeah. Okay.
Do you want to talk us through anything that's happening there for us musician dorks like?
Sure. Yeah. Well, so the piece is a 5-beat cycle, and it was inspired by a recording of a great mridangam master called Trichy Shankaran, and it starts off with a rubato piano introduction that comes out of a group of notes that I selected to compose this piece with. So I created a harmonic and melodic universe. Then there's this rubato piano intro. Then we start off with this bass line that creates the 5-beat cycle. And then we have a Konokol composition, which is played by Konokol, and then also the mridangam, and finally the drum set. And then from there, we go into a more jazz-inflected improvisational section between the soprano saxophone and the piano. And then after that, we have this trading section, which is a typical Carnatic music device where, each musician in the percussion section takes a turn playing a phrase, and it's repeated. So it starts with Konokol, then mridangam, then drum set, and we go round and round, and the phrases get shorter and shorter as we go, until eventually we're playing unison. And then we finish with a big unison flourish, with a big ta on beat 1 of the 5-beat cycle, and then there's a percussion solo, improvisation, and then we take the head out.
All right, let's check it out.
Di ta tum ta di kirra girum da di ta tum ta di kirra girum da ta tum ta di kirra girum da di kirra girum da di kirra girum da di ta di kirra girum da di ta tum ta di kirra girum da ta di kirra girum da di kirra girum da di kirra girum da di ta tum ta di kirra girum da di ta kina tum ta di ta di kina tum ta di kira ta kira tum ta di ta di kina tum ta di kira ta kira tum ta di kira ta kira tum ta di kira ta kira tum ta. Ta di gina tum ta di ta di gina tum ta di ta di gina tum ta di kira ta kira tum ta. Tang ta di gina tum tang ta di gina tum tang ta di gina tum ta. Ta di ta di gina tum ta di ta di gina tum ta. Ta di ta di gina tum ta ka di ku kira ta kira tum ta. Ta ka di ku kira ta kira tum ta ka di ku kira ta kira tum ta. Ta ka di ku kira ta kira tum. Takatiku kira takatiku takatiku tadikinatum takatiku tadikinatum takatiku kira takatiku 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 takatiku kita takatari kita tum takatiku kita takatari kita tum takatiku kita takatari kita tum ta. da di kira da kira da di kira da kira da din din na da ka din din na da din na da ka din na dam da kira dum 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 kira dum dam da kira dum dam da kira dum. Jordan Perlson.
All right, so so the concert is this weekend. It's soon, right?
That's right. Yes. So it's Arun Luthra's Konokol Jazz Project, which is the name of my band, and I'll be premiering the music that I wrote during my composer's residency at Flushing Town Hall. My Exploring the Metropolis composer's residency at Flushing Town Hall. The concert is Saturday, April 28th at 6 p.m. and the band is myself on saxophones and konokol. I've got a wonderful pianist called Marko Černčec. Sam Monet is playing bass for us, and I've got Kenny Grohowski on drums. The concert starts at 6 p.m. at Flushing Town Hall, and it's free and open to the public.
Wow. That's within my budget.
Yeah, so all are welcome. Come by and celebrate, the jazz history of Queens and all these amazing musicians who made it home. And then, the music will also celebrate modern-day Queens, because Queens is the most diverse county in the world, from what I understand. And, my music celebrates that by bringing this confluence of influences together. You've got India, you've got the African-American tradition in jazz, and, in this amazing diverse neighborhood of Flushing, it'll be a great celebration of Queens and its amazing cultural heritage.
All right. Well, looking forward to it, and nice hanging with you.
Right on. Thanks, David.
Right. Peace.